I'm Lynne Northcott. I'm the brand owner of Jog On. I'm also a child and adolescent psychotherapist working in secondary school. And today I'm going to be talking with Myira Khan about the impact of lockdown and Ramadan on our mental health.
Hi, I'm Myira Khan. I'm a counsellor and supervisor. I'm also the founder of the Muslim Counsellor and Psychotherapist Network, and also a therapeutic coach under the brand Grow to Glow.
So Myira and I had this amazing conversation on the phone the other day, and we thought, why not bring this to a wider audience? And we've been thinking about how we can approach Ramadan a little bit differently to the traditional narrative that we've heard time and time again over the years by well-intended motivational speakers and scholars. So I'm sure you may have heard the phrase, Ramadan is a training ground for the rest of the year. However, we've been thinking that, is it really a training ground, or is it something different? Having read the verse in the Quran in Surah Baqarah where God describes fasting or as-sawm as being a prescription that he's provided for us as he provided for those before us in order that we may attain taqwa, i.e. God consciousness and a sense of consciousness of self in relation to God and in relation to others as well. So if it's a prescription, surely that we can challenge the viewpoint that Ramadan is a training ground. What do you think, Myira?
Well, I think this is the real key issue for me when it comes to Ramadan, this idea about it being a training ground. We described it on the phone when we were chatting about it can sometimes feel like a boot camp. And for me, that feels so far off from what it actually intends to feel like and what we actually want it for ourselves. But this idea that, yes, it's a boot camp or it's a training ground. And when we think of either or both of those words, the training ground, as we discussed the other day, it feels like, well, it's the month that gets us going for the rest of the 11 months of the year. And so that can feel like a starting point. Or if we think of it through the lens of boot camp, it then feels like it's this intense month that at the end of the 30 days, we're kind of on point. We're trained at that point. So whether we see it as training or as a boot camp, either way, it kind of infers that it's about getting to a particular goal at the end of it, and perhaps what it looks like on the outside. And for me, that doesn't quite sit well with actually the spiritual aspect of this month.
Yeah, that's right. And when we think of training, we think of something that's very kind of specific and almost this one size fits all. You know, if you do this, this and this, you will feel X, Y, and Z at the end. And we know that in reality, it isn't always that way. And I think many Muslims are afraid to voice that actually for them, this boot camp isn't nourishing them. And there's this concept around, you know, if you're not feeling spiritually enlivened during Ramadan, then there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with your prayers, there's something wrong with your fasting, that we're not doing it correctly. And I was thinking about boot camp and this training period, and we have these sergeant majors among us who are kind of drilling us down that, you know, just like the sergeant major say 10 push-ups, you know, we have, you need to do your 10 rakats and this feeling of having to comply with something that's not nourishing.
Well, it's exactly that. It's like, look at the direction of energy in a boot camp. It is about, and also the dominance and the hierarchy in it as well. A boot camp implies that if you are part of the boot camp, that there is a issue or a problem or something that you want to solve, a solution that you're aiming for, and that there is a very specific goal at the end of it. But what a boot camp also involves, and as you said, it's a sergeant major. It's supposedly someone in this very experienced expertise position who apparently knows how to do it already really well or perfectly, who then is having to drill that into you. And the energy in which that is done with, it's done through an energy of discipline, not one of love or nurturing or care or kindness or empathy. And yet those are all the traits, not all of them, they're just some of the traits that we need to experience and feel in relationship with our kind of spiritual journey. So I feel like a boot camp misses the heart of what Ramadan's about.
I mean, do you think that people's perceptions around this are slightly changing a little bit, and perhaps they are warming to more of an idea of Ramadan being more of a recovery period? When you think of this being a prescription, it almost implies that God is saying that we have become unwell in some kind. And I think if we pause for a second on Ramadan and we just look for the general population of Muslims and non-Muslims, and how the lockdown has impacted us mentally, socially, and emotionally, do you feel that that helps us to, the wider population to actually recognise how we can be affected emotionally by this big change in circumstances?
I think there's something about the lockdown already is asking us to adjust to huge changes in our lives. And I've described it quite often to a lot of people over the past few weeks, that what the lockdown has done, it has stripped away from us all those external, whether they're distractions or just aspects of our lives that have just been taken away. And it's a bit like we are now all living, a bit like the Emperor's New Clothes. We're kind of all living now with kind of the nakedness of who we are. All those external distractions, work, going to the gym, exercising, socializing with friends, whatever it is that you do outside of the home, and what perhaps you do socially or out there that is external and that other people can see that you're doing, all that is taken away now. And we really are left with ourselves. We're left with kind of the rawness of who we are when all those layers have been shed from us.
And I guess that's why so many people during lockdown have been struggling with their mental wellness. We've seen domestic services demand has been risen, and other mental health services. All the referrals that were made prior to lockdown had to be put on hold, so people have been without that kind of support that they really needed. And if you think that many of us had to adjust with all these coping mechanisms stripped away from us, the things that helped us to kind of stay in the amber stage and not hit the red stage, that those things have been removed. And generally as a population, I think most of us kind of try to adjust and readjust those coping mechanisms to see how we can how we can take care of ourselves in a different way. So for example, I love running and going to the gym, so I kind of adopt how can I do home workouts. That's just one little example, but for someone who really is struggling with mental health, it has an even greater impact with all of that being stripped away and leaving us emotionally bare.
Yeah, so much of perhaps what we do outside of the home is there to actually support us. As you said, they're kind of like our emotional crutches, but some of those crutches, we can often describe crutches as things that are negative that prop us up. But actually I think there's a lot that we do outside of the home that positively and in a healthy way props us up. It supports us emotionally and mentally. And absolutely, you take those crutches away, you take those positive, healthy ways of coping with the world, you take them away, and you're left with a real difficulty of actually how to feel good about yourself or how to make yourself feel better. The very thing that might make you feel good, as you said, might be going for a run. If that's been taken away from you, what do you substitute it with? Because perhaps for a lot of people, they don't have a plan B when it comes to an emotional self-care plan. Yeah. And so for a lot of people right now, they're going, I'm without the things that I would normally do. What can I do instead? And I think right now then for a lot of people, it's figuring out what actually is going to make me feel better.
That's right. And I think where people don't necessarily have that toolkit or have been in counselling or had training or even had a reliable friend to inspire them, they won't be thinking about, okay, how can I adjust my care plan? They perhaps might be turning to very self-deprecating behaviours to kind of cope with the emotion. And we're seeing many cases of self-harming and other ways of trying to cope that aren't necessarily in a positive way. Yeah,
I think that's perhaps one of the difficulties of lockdown, which is when you have perhaps healthy, good, positive ways of supporting yourself taken away, and the alternatives then are not as good as, or are in fact unhealthy or negative. But if they're within easy reach, people are going to reach out for them because people are in kind of survival mode. Yeah. People, it's about getting through the day, and they're going to use whatever means that is to get through the day. And as I said, that might be really unhealthy ways of coping, but it's all that's accessible to them right now. So I think there is a lot of pressure and strain on people to, and perhaps a lot of unexpected, you know, unrealistic expectations and pressures for people to kind of thrive right now, who are just trying to survive.
Well, that's right, because on the one hand, you have the general population and those inspiring people that are kind of on your TVs and on your screens saying, come on, we need to be doing this, this and this, and you know, you will feel better. And now if we shrink that population down to the Muslim population in Ramadan, how different is that, where we have high profile public speakers doing the same thing but in a specifically Ramadan spiritually way, and we have a population of people within our community who have already been stripped of their coping mechanisms. Now on top of that, another layer or layers have now been removed, where, you know, it's not just the fact that we're not eating and drinking. I personally find when I'm fasting is like the magnification of my emotions is even greater. So it's almost like lockdown gave us a bit of an experience of what that's like, but then it becomes a further magnification of the emotions that are there, and many of us aren't equipped to deal with them.
So it's like a double whammy. Ramadan in lockdown is, first of all, we take away and strip away all the external things that have been taken away because of lockdown, and then with Ramadan we have all those other things and that also get taken away and stripped away, such as the food and the drink. And so it's kind of doubly difficult then to go, okay, so what can I hold on to? What can I do that's going to make me feel good? And I think this is where, you just mentioned that we might have those maybe spiritual leaders or people kind of high up in our communities then, that almost as a case of possibly spiritual bypassing, in which, with it being a spiritual month, absolutely it's a holy month, but if people are only going to add pressure on you to make it, and almost demand, a bit like the boot camp thing, demand that you make this then a spiritual month, it's almost like it's being forced on people who actually may struggle to do more than the minimum, and again potentially unrealistic expectations that they can do more, when again they're just trying to survive it, they're trying to get through the day. And perhaps for a lot of people, getting through the day is a matter of, I'm able just to get through the day and not be able to eat or drink anything, and for other people it might be, well, I got through the day and I was able to fast, or I was able to pray. I think it's very unrealistic to then demand, I think, but the external demand, I think it's really dangerous for people to have external demands on them by other people in the community to say, no, well, you've got to make the most of it, or you've got to do this. It's quite shaming. And I think that's kind of part of the difficulty and the challenges that people are experiencing right now, that people have, as I was saying, people have a lot of expectations on them that they should be doing more, and actually it's about just trying to get through the day.
That's right. And that shaming, again, it highlights what's already there. So if someone is feeling very low in their self-worth, or their internal beliefs are that they're never good enough at anything, that they're a failure, it becomes a reinforcement of how they're already feeling about themselves. And I believe, as family members, we need to be more mindful around the impact that words and this kind of boot camp mentality may have on certain individuals. So if we think about this, and we bear in mind that even in the Quran, like, God is saying that this is a prescription. In fact, I was thinking about an injured sportsman, but maybe you could even think about an injured soldier or whatever. If someone has a physical injury, we don't put them into training. We put them into recovery, we put them into a nurturing environment. So why would it be any different from mental health? If someone has mental injury and an injury of the soul, why are we putting them into training? This is the worst place for them. It's about recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. I can 100% agree with you with that. This month, and actually I think in terms of actually everyday living, it's about what is our soul needing, what is our self with a capital S, what does our self need, and just when we might be, like you're saying, physically unwell or physically injured, we need treatment, we need medicine. It's about Ramadan then becomes like the medicine for the soul, medicine for the self. And that's around what can we take in? What can we give ourselves? How can we nurture ourselves? How can we look after ourselves that is wholesome, healthy, recovering, resting, giving ourselves, feeding ourselves, and I call it soul food. It's feeding ourselves soul food that allows us to feel nurtured, looked after, but then to be able to grow and blossom from it, rather than being shamed for, oh, you're not doing X, Y, and Z. It's about giving ourselves what we need.
And I think it's about listening to yourself. And when we have so many external messages coming in, it becomes very distracting from what our soul is saying. So I feel that this lockdown and Ramadan is a great opportunity to just listen in and to heal the different parts of ourselves through self-care. I mean, I found just in lockdown that I kind of reverted to a real childlike state. Sometimes I felt very childish, and memories of past coming out, and I thought, oh, there's a little Lynne popping up here. What does she want? What does she need? And then sort of asking little Lynne, what do you need? And then trying to give it to her. And if she wanted to play, I let her play. If she wants to be creative, I let her be creative, and nourishing that little Lynne inside of me so that she can rest and go back to sleep for a little while. And I think it's so important that we try to tune in, and at a time when we're tuning into some really difficult stuff that's just coming up and rising up, those open wounds, and how hard and difficult that must be to do on our own as well, without a clinician's help, without maybe our best mate who we'd normally see. So yeah, I guess we're moving on to the solution part of our discussion here, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you've just said, it's to recognise that we all have that inner child within us, that our inner child is in need of our adult self, our parental self, to be looked after. And so, yes, little Lynne and little Myra, it's like, can we attune to our little self? Can we really listen to what we're needing? And I think almost we've kind of, we often kind of are disconnected from our little self. Very often we don't listen to it. Not because we perhaps, well, maybe some of us don't know that it's even there, but perhaps for a lot of us, it's because our little internal person, their voice is so small and so quiet that they get, overshadowed by and drowned out by all the external noise. And that external noise can be other people. It can be what we think society wants of us, or expects of us, or demands of us, or community, or family, or friends, or peers. And so our self gets just smaller and smaller and smaller. And what this lockdown has actually enabled us to do is in a way, it's like dialed down the volume on all those other people. Yeah. And it's given up the space and allowed the space for our little self to come forward and go, this is what I need. And I think it's really important then that we start to pay attention to that, start to reattune, reconnect with yourself, and what is it that you need in this moment? Because I just don't think we get the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. And I guess that little self can sometimes come with this velvet dagger. So at the same time, we have the playful, needy child within us, but usually he or she is speaking from a time and place when they were hurt, when they were damaged. And normally when you see that voice rise up and this little self is saying, I need such and such, it's because of some pain or difficulty that happened at that particular time and age. And that's, I guess, where you get the pain with the painfulness and the feeling of need. But as you're saying, tuning in and the adult self, listening to what that inner child needs at that point and trying to give them what they need will help us to heal that part of ourself that's very painful.
Absolutely, because the beauty of listening to our inner child is that we are listening to it from an adult perspective. What that allows us then to do is to, it's a kind of a double celebration in a way. One which is we're giving the space for our inner child to speak up, ask for what it needs. But second of all, as an adult, we can then meet that need within us. And I think the very reason why the inner child can often feel not heard or not listened to is because our inner child is a child and can't meet its own needs. And so what we learn to do is we learn to stop asking. We might hold on to a belief that if I ask for what I need, it's not going to get met, that I've grown up in a household or a family in which when I ask for something, I get dismissed, I get told that, no, you can't have it, or I get ignored. The beauty is that by listening to yourself, you're then being kind of the parent to your own inner child that you wanted when you were that age, that you can then meet the need and go, oh yes, little Myra, is that what you need? As adult Myra, I can go, yes, I can give that to you now. And we can do that for ourselves.
And I think that helps us to feel more safe as an adult as well. When we've allowed the child within us to feel safe and soothed, be able to soothe that part of ourselves, then we can kind of do the adulting part, having developed that part of our history.
Yeah.
So let's bring that back into where we are now. What can we put out there into the big wide world around how we can support ourselves during this really challenging time, being in Ramadan, being fasting, all coping mechanisms have been stripped away. How can we begin to heal ourselves and really utilize Ramadan as a healing period in which God's saying he's prescribing this for us? What do you think God is wanting from us here?
Oh, I love this idea that when we look at it through a prescription, as you said, that when we start to see it as treatment, what's the first thing that doctors do is to diagnose. So there's something around what we need to do for ourselves is actually diagnose ourselves. And I don't mean medically or diagnose ourselves with some kind of label, but what I mean is identify where are the wounds, where is the emotional wounds, where's the emotional pain, what is it that you're needing? Because only once you identify what is it that needs looking after within you, then you know what the treatment and medicine is for it. So there's that first of all. And I think that takes that time of reflection. As you said, this is a time for treatment and recovery. And so the first step is identify and reflect and attune to yourself to know what is it that needs working on within you. What are the parts of you that feel painful? What are the parts of you that you've abandoned? What are the parts of you you've been ignoring? What are perhaps some of your core beliefs around your needs? Do you ask yourself, what do I think that if I ask for it, I won't get it? Or what is it that I find myself continuously wanting in life, but not receiving? So we can start to identify what are perhaps the lacks in our life, the things that are lacking in our life, or the things that we feel are unmet. Then we can start to treat them. Yeah. That's the second step.
And I guess it's about making sure that doesn't feel overwhelming, so that perhaps we can focus on one thing at a time, no matter how small or big it is, but taking one part of our journey and reflecting on it and trying to soothe that. In the same way, if we have a physical injury, we'll look at we don't go into surgery to fix everything all at once. It's one thing at a time. And I think that's what's really important as well, isn't it? To not feel overwhelmed in it when we already are.
Yeah, again, otherwise it turns into boot camp again. It turns into, right, let's fix the whole of you in one go. It's not. It's about identifying those parts of you that need that treatment, that need that kind of love and care and attention from you. And how do you then start to build up a daily self-care habit? How do you build up a consistent relationship with yourself where you can start to meet those needs in an everyday consistent way? So it's not like a booster shot once and then you're fixed for the next 10 years kind of thing. It's what is like a daily vitamin. It's like a daily emotional vitamin or supplement that you take that's around what am I giving myself each and every day that means that I boost those levels, that I up those levels of well-being within me. And some of those classics are kind of the rest. Make sure you're resting well, make sure that you're getting exercise, making sure that you're spending time with yourself, getting to know yourself. That's kind of a starting point.
And I guess what we're talking about here is when we're looking at that particular verse in Surah Baqarah, that is saying if you take the prescription, then you may become those of al-muttaqun, so those who have taqwa. And if you look at some of the archaic ways that when English Qurans were first being translated, you would have usually seen that taqwa means fear of God, fear of Allah, but in more recent, understanding of the Arabic and being able to translate it into English, it's been enhanced to understand it as consciousness. So we have that self-consciousness. We're aware of ourselves in relation to God, how then our behavior and our thinking impacts our relationship with God. So once we can't change or adapt our behaviors unless we're aware of them. So for me, a psalm which isn't necessarily about fasting from food and water, a psalm refraining, reflecting and thinking enables us to be conscious, and then therefore enables us to think about how we relate to God and how we want to behave before him and the rest of creation, of course.
For me, the word solitude keeps coming up as you were speaking just then, which is, we can't go inward if we're busy looking outward, and we go inward by going into solitude. And I think that's what the lockdown has offered us. It's what Ramadan offers us every year, which is an opportunity to go inward. And only once we go inward can we then actually recognize that we have that connection and consciousness to God, that it's there all the time. It's a bit like something that's there all the time, but we're not always conscious of it. And in going into solitude, what we can do is practice that consciousness, practice being aware, keep kind of reconnecting to it consciously, keep reminding ourselves of it. Because once we do that, it turns into kind of, again, this consistent daily habit that means that the more we do it, the more it's there. And what that does also, when we then go back into kind of the external world, once we then shift our focus from looking inwardly to then looking outwardly, it means that we're taking that with us as well. We cannot go without external if we're not taking it from within. So we have to kind of build it within us first before we can take it out there.
And if we think about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the month of Ramadan, when the first Quranic verse was revealed, when the Quran came to him and he received the first message from the Quran, it happened to him when he was in the mountain, in the cave, in a place of solitude, and he'd been there for some time. I can only imagine trying to be in tune with himself and God and the creation. And that's when the revelation came to him, in that place.
There is an absolutely, because in that solitude, it then becomes a real kind of intensity to it. There is a real sense of, wow, my entire focus is purely on this one thing. And we know what it feels like when we are paying our full attention to that thing in front of us. And so it gives it the weight, it gives it the value that it deserves. And so solitude for us now, whether it's during Ramadan or any other time of the year that you want to practice being in solitude, what you're actually doing is honouring then the very thing that you're paying attention to. And that's the beauty then of God consciousness, because if that's the only thing we're paying attention to, then look at what we're valuing, look at what we're paying our fullest attention to. Something then that we want to then, as I said earlier, take into the rest of our life. And, into other areas of life when we're busy doing other things. But that solitude allows us to give that 100% attention to that one thing in front of us.
That's right. And I think that is so important that we're having this conversation, because this narration around this bootcamp mentality and this training ground mentality, I really feel it needs to be relooked at. And I kind of do agree that there'll be some people who totally benefit from that mindset, who will totally be able to, I'm going to soldier through this month, and I'm going to do loads and loads and loads, and then they continue to improve outside of the month, and then the following month they get even stronger and stronger. But then it neglects a large number of people for whom that is not a reality for many reasons, and especially those that are struggling with depression, anxiety, PTSD, because when those feelings and emotions come up, it's a trigger of memories in childhood and really hard, difficult experiences. So for that person, it is a recovery, and boot camp has got to be out of the question.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of, when we were speaking earlier, it's like the difference between going on a boot camp, like a a high intensity boot camp compared to going on a retreat. And so I think of Ramadan as a spiritual retreat. It is a retreat for the soul. And as you're saying, for many people, that boot camp mentality, that approach might suit people because it's one about structure and frameworks and discipline and routines and rules and boundaries. And for some people, they will naturally gravitate towards that because it's something that they can apply, something that kind of fits in with their mindset, something that works for them. But it doesn't work for everybody, as you said. And I think this is where, if we think about Ramadan as a spiritual retreat, if we see it as a retreat, as recovery, as nurturing, as self-care, what that allows us to do is immediately to go inward. And then it asks of ourself, what is it that we're needing? And I think the beauty in that, or really the real opportunity in that, is that you start to trust yourself. It allows you to build up trust, that you listen to yourself, that you go, I trust what I need. If I take away my logical mindset, if I take away what's going on up here, and I drop down into my soul, into my heart, into my gut, what I'm actually doing is attuning to my core self, my soul, and that allows me then to trust that it knows what it's doing. This idea that the soul is always returning home. Our soul is on a journey back home, and if we can listen to it, it guides us.
And I think when we think about how at the beginning of Ramadan, it's a sunnah for you to kind of make an intention, an internal intention. For me, that brings up, when as counsellors, when we have a new client, we make a contract. So similarly, we're about to enter into a treatment process, using Ramadan as a treatment recovery process. And that's got to be tailor-made. That's got to be a unique, a unique treatment just for each and every individual person, like a fingerprint. That's a contract between you and God, that he knows and you know what it is that you want to work on, what the injury is, the diagnosis, and then how you want to apply the treatment to be able to get to this newer version of you, whatever that looks like or doesn't look like at the end of Ramadan. So yeah, this intention, this contract with God is unique and it's individualistic, which is why, the sergeant majors need to jog on.
Thinking rather, when you were speaking just then about, it might sound strange, but Ramadan as a concept in itself isn't the treatment. The treatment actually is, how do you apply Ramadan to yourself? It's the equivalent of having a large bottle of medicine. Now, having it just sitting there, but not applying it in a way that's actually going to treat you, is not going to do its job. So there's something around, yes, there are boundaries around it, there are rules around what fasting is, but Ramadan as a whole spiritual month, what else do you need to be doing? How do you need to apply it to yourself? It's a bit like an emotional balm for the heart and the soul. And it's, how are you applying it? Once a day, once a week? What does it look like? What's the feel of it? What is it that you're doing that means that you're applying this emotional balm to your soul? And for some people, that might be reading more. For other people, it might be journaling more. For other people, it might be listening to lectures. Other things might be things such as like keeping a gratitude journal, which I recommend to everybody anyway to do. But it's about, what does it look like for you? As you were saying, it's individualistic. It's about how you individually engaging with it. The parallel for me, in a way, might sound strange, which is Christmas. It's a concept, but what it looks like for each individual person is very, very different. And I think it's perhaps easier to see it in if we take it outside of Ramadan and use a different example, such as Christmas. If we have this idea that lots of people celebrate Christmas, but what it might look for each individual person or each individual family will be different. They're applying it in a way that feels good for them. So if we can do that with Ramadan, what we're then doing is we're actually honouring, again, we're going back to valuing, honouring and trusting what our soul needs this month.
I was just getting an image of, my sergeant major with the bottle going, no, you have to have 2 spoonfuls. And they're like, no, but I can only take 1.
Yeah.
And it's a different dosage. And it doesn't mean that anything's more rewardable with God than one thing or the other, because if it's a tailor-made treatment, then God knows, and that contract you've made with him, he knows. And although I didn't really want to get into expiation from fasting, I think it is important to just touch upon it, because I didn't really want to touch upon it because, one, I'm not a scholar who's, of fiqh, and the other one because I'm not a doctor. But, as someone who's been around mental health and as a clinician, I do, my professional opinion would be that for fasting, some people that they would be expiated due to depression or anxiety. And that's something that they can come to the conclusion upon with the discussion with their doctors and their prescriber. Because for some people, the fasting from food and drink will become too traumatic and to the level where they may really delve into some self-deprecating behaviours. So that's a discussion I think people need to be having with their clinicians.
Absolutely, definitely, because again, it's not a one size fits all. Our individual relationship with food, again, is unique to each and every one of us. And if our relationship with food is enmeshed with our emotional or mental health, then taking away the food is only going to exacerbate or trigger potentially some disordered eating or trigger other mental health issues within yourself. So I completely agree that it's about, again, for that individual, what's best for them and for their mental health, for their soul, for their emotional health. And again, so again, we can't, with Ramadan, it's not about minimizing it either down to we just don't eat or drink. That's one aspect of the month. And so if somebody can't eat or drink, it doesn't mean that they're not participating in Ramadan. But I think, again, there's this myth that, if you're not fasting from food and drink, that means you're not engaging in it. But you can engage in other ways then. If you can't fast from the food or drink, you can then do other things that then is around, again, feeding your soul in the month.
That's right. And when you look at the Arabic word as-sawm, it isn't specifically about refraining from food and drink. That word is so broad that it's applied in many other ways, refraining from speaking and other ways. So for us, it's okay, well, maybe I can't physically fast from food and drink, but what else, as you said, can I refrain from? And this, I feel, is important that we have touched upon it, because this is something for everyone around that person. Because when you have someone with a significant mental health problem, they're not just one individual person. Everyone around that person, the whole environment, needs to be nurturing and empathic. So what advice can we give to the whole family when there is someone among us who's struggling with their mental health?
I think, as you said, there's something about the love, the care, the kindness, the understanding, the empathy. Again, we have to be really careful not to project onto other people our expectations of what their Ramadan should look like because of how we want ours to feel like or look like. So again, going back actually to the idea of the intentions we might have for ourselves, the good intentions we have for ourselves and for how we want to experience this month, be really careful that we're not projecting them onto other people, or equally this idea about it being a one size fits all. So, catch yourself and stop yourself from projecting onto other people what you think their Ramadan should look like. And then second of all is really the key thing for me, which is empathy. Empathize and try to understand that that person is different to you, and that their experience and what they're needing in this month is different from you and from everyone else. And so if we can offer that understanding, that compassion, that level of care and consideration, I always think of it in terms of, how would I want somebody to treat me? Would I want somebody to come down and be that sergeant major and to treat me with that kind of discipline or that punishment if I'm not doing what's expected of me? Or would I rather have somebody that comes along with love, care, understanding, compassion, forgiveness, patience is another one? Can we so easily then offer that to other people when we feel that they're perhaps not doing what they should be doing? It's a kind of a give and take in this situation.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you. So let's conclude. I hope that this has been a really positive message for everyone in different ways. I feel like what I want to take from it is this, that we're thinking about a unique, tailor-made, a tailor-made treatment plan. And I have used this concept in the past, the training ground for the rest of the year. I've said those words. I've been a motivational speaker and I've said that. And if I could take them all back now, I would. But I'm glad that we're shifting in a new direction. And maybe not new, maybe we're reverting back to actually how the essence of Ramadan needs to be experienced, that it's not something new. In fact, it is the tradition of, the Prophet, peace be upon him, to return back to that state. And also, one hadith springs to mind where it's in a hadith Qudsi where Abu Hurairah narrated that the Prophet said that Allah had said that he reward, I'm going to paraphrase, but fasting is for him and he rewards however he wants. So there's other deeds that get specific kind of rewards for them. But as for fasting, this is a unique kind of, again, an individual type of reward that he gives to each individual person, because he sees the struggle and he sees how hard things are and he sees how easy things are. So, and he'll reward that accordingly.
And what I'm reminded of in that as well is, just as, for the people then that can't fast and able to fast, that Allah knows the difficulties you're going through. He knows the struggles, because that's what he has, in that respect, that's what he's prescribed for you. So it's not as if actually that there's no justification that you need to do to anybody as to why you're not fasting. Allah knows why you already knows why you're not fasting, because the very reason is the situation he's given you. But I think that for a lot of people, they feel the need to then justify why they might not be fasting to other people. Nobody else, you're not answerable to anybody else, so nobody else needs to know your reasons why not. No one else needs to be brought round to your way of thinking. No one else needs to accept why you're not fasting. It is about, Allah knows your exact situation. It's in your heart, it's in your soul, and he knows that.
Yeah. So do you have any final words to wrap up our wonderful dialogue today?
For me, if we see Ramadan as a month of soul food, and so ask yourself, what are you feeding yourself that's nurturing, caring and kind and beneficial and healthy for your soul and for yourself?
And my finishing words are, just remember, Ramadan is a recovery. It's not about giving ourselves a boost to manage the rest of the year. Maybe it's in reverse, and it's about how do we recover from what's just passed, and so that we can then move on. And until we kind of heal some of those wounds, it's going to be really difficult to move on. So use this as an opportunity to gain that consciousness of self, renew your contracts with God, and keep looking after yourself and self-caring, and looking at what that looks like for you in an individualistic way. Okay, so we're going to finish there. I really hope myself and Myra get together again for another conversation like this. I think for me it's been really inspiring just to hear what Myra's had to say. And so stay tuned and look out for our next episode. Take care.